So, when I was a youth pastor, we used to take kids to snow camp, to regular camp, to different outings and so forth. A couple times I took them ice skating, which was a treat for me. I don't know if you know, I'm a really good ice skater. I'm a Zamboni. I clean the ice with my back, at any rate. But the one year I took several kids to snow camp, and I got there and I was registering the kids and gave them the money. It was like $500 because we had that many kids. And they said, there's one kid that's not going to be able to stay for snow camp. And that was not acceptable to me. These were my kids, not my personal offspring as such, but they were my kids, and I did everything I could to convince the leaders that wanted to send one of my kids home that no, that can't happen. I will be responsible for anything they do or whatever, and I was prepared to say I'll take all their money back and I'll take all my kids because they're my kids. That's interceding. That is putting yourself in front of. To intercede is to plead in favor of one. That's what I did. It literally means to move or to pass in between. It's like a gunman comes out and the husband gets between the gunman and the wife. Hopefully it's not the other way around. All right, but the husband, he is willing to take a bullet for his wife, for his family. That is interceding, getting in the way. It's an intercessor is one who interposes between parties at variance. There's an issue there, and one comes between. It is very similar to what we refer to as a mediator, all right? But it's more than that. It's not just a messenger between two parties trying to settle something. It's someone, it's not, at least not a true intercessor. All right? It's someone who comes in between. And I want to look this morning at two Bible examples of intercessors and what it means to be an intercessor and to glean some true wisdom from both of these men. First one we're going to look at is Moses. Now, I mentioned in my, I believe it was a Sunday school lesson. It may have been when I preached last. I can't remember. But there was a quote from Moody. And he said this about Moses. Moses spent 40 years thinking he was somebody, 40 years learning he was nobody, and 40 years discovering what God can do with a nobody. And that accurately describes Moses. Moses was, as we know, very reluctant at first when God called him. Remember, we take him through his life, and he spent the first 40 years, as I mentioned what D.L. Moody said, he spent the first 40 years in Egypt, and someone, actually, an Egyptian had struck one of his men and so forth, and he killed that Egyptian and buried him in the sand and so forth, and he interceded there to split up this fight. And he left when he was 40, and he went out into the wilderness, into Midian, and he was there, and he was a shepherd. And he did that for 40 years. He married a wife named Zipporah, all right, and had a son named Gershom, and there was another son, and I can't remember what his name is off the top. I think it was Eleazar, actually, but I could be wrong there. At any rate, he was there until he was 80 years old, and then when he was 80 years old, he was out with his sheep, and we know that the account there in Exodus chapter 2 where where he's at the burning bush, and God tells him that he needs to, that he is going to be the one to go back to Egypt and free Israel. And we know Moses was very, very reluctant at first. I can't do that, I can't speak well. And all these other different things, and they're going to say, who sent me, and so forth. And Moses was very, very reluctant at first, and God showed him some things that he needed to do in order to be able to go and free Israel from Egypt. after God had finally convinced Moses to go with Aaron, he did. And after he thought himself that he was just not the right guy to do that, the people that he went to free agreed with him and said, "You are not the guy to free us." Remember when they were, when he first went there and he said that he was going to get them out of Egypt, and Pharaoh said, "Oh, well, you got nothing better to do. We're going to make your workload. You got to do the same stuff, but we're not even going to give you materials anymore. No more straw. All right, you got to go find your own straw." And the people came to Moses, "Look, you're trying to get us out of here? You just made it worse." And they turned on him and said, "You're not the guy. You're not the guy." Aaron and Miriam, we spoke of them a little bit in Sunday school this morning with everyone together, as Martha chose Miriam as our little Bible person to discuss. They said that he was not the only guy, claiming that others were, that God had spoken by them, and they were just as much leaders as Moses was. It's interesting when you look at that passage where they do that in Numbers chapter 12. The very next verse after they're making this accusation to Moses is, "Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth." Remember what happened when that happened? Miriam was struck with leprosy and spent a week outside of the camp, and Moses interceded for Miriam. And God healed her and brought her back into the camp, but she had to spend at least 7 days outside because she was unclean. Others challenged Moses, saying, "You're not the guy. What you're doing is wrong." Korah challenged Moses, said that everyone was good, not just him. Moses was meek above everyone, but Moses didn't think that he was the best. It was a position that God put him in, and eventually he willingly took that position and saw God use him. But people kept coming against him and turning against him, saying, "You're not the guy. You're not the guy." Remember what happened to Korah? Ground opened up, swallowed them all up. That's it. And the neat thing about that account is that it happened immediately after. Moses says, "Well, if these guys die like everybody else dies, of old age or whatever, then God hasn't sent me. But if God does something new, and he opens up the ground and swallows them up, then you'll know that God has put me in this for this reason." And he just gets that out of his mouth, and what happens? Gone. And the people turned against Moses again. "Look what you did to these people." He didn't open the ground up, but they turned against him over and over and over. The people complained against Moses. He brings them out of Egypt. He gets them to the Red Sea. "Why didn't you just leave us back in Egypt?" They'd just seen the 10 plagues and God do marvelous things. And the neat thing about these plagues is God drew a line where Egypt was and where Israel was in the land of Goshen. And the cattle were dying over on this side of the line, and they were mooing and carrying on and doing whatever they needed to do on this side of the line, no problem. And these guys were stuck in darkness that could be felt. And there was light with the Israelites. And they'd seen that God had made these differences, but when they got out and there was a little bit of a problem, yeah, there was mountains on both sides and there was an ocean in front of them, and the soldiers were coming, but they'd seen God. All of them had seen God do these things over 10 times. The water to blood, the frogs, the lice, the flies, the murine, the boils, the hails, and all those things. And they turn to Moses and say, "What have you done?" And God moves the pillar of fire around, stops them, opens up the sea, and they go through, and you know what? They complain. A couple days later, they're going, and the water that they're going to drink is bitter in a place called Marah. And they complain, "Well, look, you brought us out here to kill us in the thirst in the wilderness." And God tells Moses, he points out, "There's a tree, throw the tree in the water, everything will be fine." How that works? It doesn't. It's only God. All right? He takes this tree and he throws a tree in the water, and all of a sudden the water is pure. It's not RO'd. It's not distilled. It's God made it better by throwing a tree in there. If you go to Culligan, they won't advise you to throw a tree down your well to fix your well. They'll sell you something that they can keep getting money off of every day. Okay? But that's how God works. And he made the water was sweet. They complained about, are you ready for this? They complained about manna. God delivered groceries to their door. You step outside, it doesn't cost anything. You know, bread's going through the roof like all the rest of the groceries are. Not these. It's at your door. Step outside, scoop it up, put it in a bucket, take it home, cook it. They complained about that. Oh, it had such a terrible taste. Like wafers with honey. It's like those Toblerone chocolate bars. They're made with honey in that chocolate. And those are good. Those are good. Walter, did you get that? Make a note. Brother Tricky was talking about how well he liked Ferrero Rochers, and he barely finish the message, and Walter had a box of them for him. So I'm just kind of dropping that little hint off there, you know. They complained about of what they were eating, and God sent them quail, up to their knees, deep in quail. Mind you, when they grabbed these things and they were eating them raw, he said, okay, that's it. And he made them sick. But nonetheless, they complained over and over and over again. The waters at Rephidim, they complained there. Many, many other times. And finally at the water of Meribah, at Rephidim, God says, just get the water out of this rock. And he told them what to do, to get the water out of that rock. But then they get to that other place. They get to that place called Meribah. And you got to feel for Moses, all right? Did he want this job to begin with? But he accepted it, all right? It took some convincing, but he was there, and they're complaining and complaining and complaining and complaining. And why did you do this? And God provides a big miracle. Why did you do that? And then something else happens, and they get to Rephidim, and they're complaining because they don't have water again. And Moses, in Numbers chapter 20, verse 10 says, and Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said unto them, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? God had told him he was going to give him water out of that rock. But he says, what do you think that we need to do this for you? And he took his rod and he smote the rock. And water came out. God intervened and gave them the water. But Moses says, must we fetch you water out of this rock? God says, wait a minute. You didn't do anything here. That water's from me, and you tried to take the glory away from me. You're not getting into the promised land. After all the hassles that Moses had gone through, he breaks. God's a holy God. God's a holy God. Put no other gods before me. That includes you yourself. And that's what Moses did. First commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. He put himself ahead of God. He says, must we fetch you water out of this rock? But God in his mercy and in his grace gave them water. Should he have given them water? Well, yeah, he's God. He made the right choice, all right? I'm not doubting God's choice, but think about this, all right? He did not do what God told him to do. He tried to take the glory from God, and God in his grace, everything that God does, we don't deserve. But these people got the water from that rock. But I want you to take your Bibles. This is where Moses has been, all right? Understand this is Moses. Take your Bibles, come with me to Deuteronomy chapter 9. Deuteronomy chapter 9. We see here that it's coming to the end. Moses knows, and now they disobeyed when they were allowed to go across, and they decided, no, when they sent the spies out, and they said, it's a great land, but we can't get over there. And God said, all right, you're going to, for the 40 days you spent in the promised land, you're going to spend a year for every day of that, 40 years, until everybody above the age of 20 years old dies, and your children will go into the land. So it's 40 years has passed. All right. Moses knows, because God told him at Rephidim, you aren't going into the land. Moses knows the only other two people that are over 40 is Joshua and Caleb and Moses at this time. And Moses knows, I'm going to die, but before I die, and you guys are going to go into the land, he gives like a farewell address to them in Deuteronomy, and looking here in verse 9, or chapter 9 rather, verse 1. It says, "Hear, O Israel, thou art to pass over Jordan this day to go in to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities great and fenced up to heaven, a people great and tall, the children of the Anakims, whom thou knowest, and of whom thou hast heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak? Understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which goeth over before thee. As a consuming fire he shall destroy them, and he shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord has said unto thee. Speak not thou in thine heart after that the Lord thy God hath cast them out before thee, saying, For my righteousness the Lord hath brought me in to possess this land. But for the wickedness of these nations the Lord doth drive them out from before thee. Not for thy righteousness, or for the uprightness of thine heart dost thou go to possess their land, but for the wickedness of these nations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee, that he may perform the word which the Lord sware unto thy fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand therefore that the Lord thy God giveth thee not this good land to possess it for thy righteousness, for thou art a stiff-necked people. Remember and forget not how thou provokest the Lord thy God to wrath in the wilderness from the day that thou didst depart out of the land of Egypt until ye came unto this place. Ye have been rebellious against the Lord. Also in Horeb ye provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry with you to have destroyed you." Moses tells them, and really no uncertain words here, that, you guys are going to get something here that you don't deserve. And he brings them to a point. He's telling them, he says, listen, the reason you're getting this land is not because you're good. Don't think for a second you deserve what you're getting. But these people that God has given years and years and years a chance to turn. And God does that. And there was people in these nations that did want to serve God. We have Rahab in Jericho, and there is a small remnant all over the place. There are people that did turn, but by far and large, the bulk of these people were just evil, vile, idol-worshiping, children-sacrificing, immoral people that would not turn to God. And God said, that's it, I'm going to wipe them out. And the reason you're going to come in here is because I'm wiping them out. It's got nothing to do with how good you are. And he brings them to this point here where they are. He says, also in Horeb, verse 8, ye provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry with you to have destroyed you. Moses had gone up into Mount Horeb. He had received the 10 Commandments. You remember it? And as he was, up there for 40 days, he was there, and he brought the 10 Commandments back down, and there was one other person that was halfway up the mountain with him, who was Joshua. And when Moses started to come down, Joshua says, it sounds like there's war in the camp. And Moses says, that's not war that I hear. That's partying that I hear. That's the sound of song and dance and everything else. And he went down and he saw that they were worshiping the golden calf. All right? And we see here, look at verse number 14. It says, this is what God wanted to do. He says, let me alone. This is God speaking to Moses. Let me alone that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make of thee a nation mightier and greater than they. God said, I am going to wipe them out. I've had enough of these people and what they're doing. You've only been gone for 40 days, and now they've got a golden calf. They're worshiping this golden calf. 40 days, barely a month. And he said, I'm going to wipe them out. And Moses, God says, I'm going to make a nation from you. Moses gets in the line of fire. Like the man with the gun and the husband in front of the wife. Moses gets in the line of fire. Look at verse 18. And I fell down before the Lord, as at the first 40 days and 40 nights. I did neither eat bread nor drink water because of all your sins which ye sinned in doing wickedly in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure wherewith the Lord was wroth against you to destroy you. But the Lord hearkened unto me at that time also. Moses stood in the way, got in the gap between God's wrath and all of Israel. And if we look at that passage in Exodus chapter 32, I'm just going to read you one other thing that he doesn't tell the people here what he said. But that he said to God when he was there. In Exodus chapter 32, verse 32, he says, Yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written. You know, Moses, if you're not going to forgive them, you take me. Take me instead. That's what Moses is doing. These people that had rebelled against God and told Moses over and over and over again that you aren't the guy, why did you bring us out here? Over and over, for 40 years. He's dragging these people along for 40 years. He's not a young guy. He's 80 years old before he started this. He's 120 years old. These people have been on and on and on. And you know what Moses does? Well, he was only about 80 when he did this standing in the gap part. But we see later on what's happened here. But here he is, standing in the gap, putting himself in the line of fire, saying, take me instead. You're still in Deuteronomy chapter 9. Look at verse 20. It says, And the Lord was very angry with Aaron to have destroyed him. And I prayed for Aaron also the same time. He stood in front of Aaron. He stood in front of Aaron and was willing to take whatever. That's intercession. But what I want to see today is what intercession is not. What intercession is not. First off, intercession is not deserved. It's not deserved. Moses goes into great detail to show Israel that what God was doing, what God was giving them, as we read through there in chapter 9, and the first few verses, that what God was giving them had nothing to do with their righteousness. They didn't have any. These are stiff-necked people, all right? It had nothing to do with what they did, all right? When you look at verses 4 and verse 5, it says, Speak not thou in thine heart after that the Lord thy God hath cast them out from before thee, saying, For my righteousness the Lord hath brought me in to possess this land. But for the wickedness of these nations the Lord doth drive them out from before thee. Not for thy righteousness or for the uprightness of thine heart dost thou go in to possess the land, but for the wickedness of these nations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee, that he may perform the word which the Lord sware unto thy fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You can't get any more blunt than that. And he tells them, you don't get this because you deserve this, all right? Going before God for someone has absolutely nothing to do with how we may feel that they deserve a break, or that they deserve another chance, or that this person has done so much good for the Lord that I need to go and intercede. It has nothing to do with that. It's like we've been praying for David Smith. And I got a text yesterday from Phil that said that the doctors figured that he was going to pass away yesterday. I haven't heard back from him yet. David Smith is a great guy. I went on several missions trips with him. When Phil was getting his treatment for cancer and he couldn't go, David Smith set his business aside for about a year. Just parked his business so that he could take over for Phil until Phil could get better. He is a good man of God. But if my decision to pray for him is because he is a good man of God, I've missed the point. Should I pray for him because he's a good man of God? Yes, but it's not because I shouldn't intercede because he deserves it and this person doesn't, so I'm not going to intercede for them. We may not like your prime minister. You may not like your boss at work. But it's not that whether they deserve it or not, whether we should intercede for them. That's not what intercession is. Intercession is not deserved. Did these Israelites deserve intercession from Moses? They're vile. Vile people over and over and over and over and over again. They turned against him. They turned against God. And what does Moses do? Take me instead. Take me instead. That's intercession. That's intercession. Not whether they deserve it because we think they're good, or not doing it because we don't think they deserve it. Intercession is not deserved. Number 2, intercession is not asked for. Now, I'm not saying that if someone shouldn't ask you to pray for them. That you should do. I should be going to Jerry, to Wayne, and if I have a need, and I should say, can you guys pray for me? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. But what I'm saying is, whether we decide to intercede or not, should not be if this person, well, they haven't asked, I'm not going to intercede for them. Because they haven't asked. Did Israel ask Moses to intercede for them? They didn't even know that Moses interceded for them. They had no idea that Moses was interceding for them. We can't base our decision on whether or not to intercede on whether they ask. Moses stepped into the gap before Israel even had a clue that God was about to nuke them all. Moses was there. Exodus 32:32. Yet now if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book, which thou hast written. Number 3, that intercession is not. Intercession is not a little ditty. Say, what's a little ditty, brother? Well, it's just a casual prayer. Like many of us, me included, have prayed for our food before. Have you ever prayed for your food and 3 bites in you wonder, did I pray for my food? You know what? We had a little ditty. We had a little ditty. Did I mean it? I don't even remember if I did it. How can I mean it if I don't even remember I did it? You know? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I'm pretty sure everybody had to put up their hand because I'm sure I know I've done that. I know I prayed and then somebody else said, did we even pray? Yeah, we prayed, I prayed. That's a little ditty. There's nothing casual about what Moses was doing for these people. There's nothing casual, little slogan lines that we like to use, little lingo phrases that we use in prayer. I remember I had a fellow at work one time, and he asked me, he said, so do you pray in King James? I knew exactly what he was talking about. Do I say these and thous when I'm praying? I said, no, I don't pray in King James. Oh, okay. Little ditties. Look at what Moses did. Chapter 9, verse 18. And I fell down before the Lord. Has your concern for someone else ever literally, and I don't say literally, it always bugs me when people use the word literally in a figurative way. All right. You ever seen them do that? They literally, we're going to blow that place up. No, they really weren't, all right? But have you ever literally been driven to your knees for somebody else? Verse 19, he says, for I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure when you have, he was afraid. When you have ever prayed for a loved one for their salvation, are you really fearful of where their destination is if they don't accept the Lord? Do we lose sight of what we're praying for? Intercession is not a little ditty. It's not just a little thing, all right? Is there real fear in our hearts for others that we're praying for? Or is it, well, I really hope they get saved? Number 4, Intercession is not without sacrifice. Verse 25, it says, "Thus I fell down before the Lord 40 days and 40 nights as I fell down at the first, because the Lord said he would destroy you." Moses fasted for these people. You know what a real fast is? A real fast, nobody else knows you're fasting. You're not supposed to disfigure your face or, oh yeah, well, I'm really hungry, but I'm fasting for the Lord. That's not, okay. You just might as well go grab a burger because you just blew it. All right? Fasting is between you and God. Now, you may have to tell your spouse that you're fasting because there's certain things that includes with your spouse. All right? But nobody else should know that you're fasting. It's between you and God. That makes it more serious rather than, well, somebody's going to pat me on the back and say, oh, look, whew, Brother Taylor, he fasts. Not enough, but okay. But sacrifice, all right? Intercession is not without sacrifice. Moses fasted for these people. Moses interceded. And intercession takes time. He spent 40 days and 40 nights for these people. It takes time. It's not a little ditty. That's not the title of the message either, not a little ditty. That's not the title, all right? Greg's always looking for a title. It's What Intercession is Not. That's the title. But it's not just a little ditty, okay? It takes time. It takes emotion. It costs. He is fearful for these people. That's a cost, all right? It costs emotion. It costs anguish. It costs real life. Intercession takes commitment. That's in the fasting part. You know what? There is one that is interceding for you. We're going to look at our second person. Take your Bibles and come with me to Luke chapter 22. Luke 22. Verse number 31. "And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." Jesus tells Peter, you know what? I've been praying for you. I have been interceding for you. You know what? Jesus intercedes for us. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 34 it says, "Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also maketh intercession for us." That's what Jesus is doing. In Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 25 it says, "Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them." That's what Jesus is doing for us, you know. He's making intercession. He is coming before Peter even knew, before we even know what Jesus, what is happening with us, Jesus is there. Before the Israelites knew what was happening and God was going to, you're gone. Moses was there before that. That's intercession, before, all right? Number one, intercession is not deserved. Do we deserve anything from Jesus? Not a thing. But Romans chapter 5:8 says, "But God commendeth his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." Provided a way for us. You know what? Salvation was planned before earth was created. The plan of salvation was already in plans. It's already there. It's already there. Before God said, "Let there be light," salvation's plan was in place. Number two, intercession is not asked for. Did Jesus wait before he interceded? In Luke chapter 23 and verse 34, it says, "Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they parted his raiment and cast lots. While they were crucifying him and didn't think anything about it, he's dying for their sin. And what are they doing? Who's going to get his shoes? Who's going to get his coat? Well, we don't want to cut his coat up. We'll draw lots for his coat. He's dying for the sin. All right? Not asked for, but there he is. How often do you think Jesus is 10 steps ahead of us and interceding for us like he was interceding for Peter? Satan desires to have you to sift you as wheat, but I've been praying for you, Peter. Number 3, intercession is not a little ditty. How lightly do you see Jesus treating intercession? Not lightly. And number 4, intercession is not without sacrifice. How can we compare anything we do with the sacrifice Jesus made for us? And it's not just the beating that he took. It's not just being hung on a cross. It's not just the people mocking him. That all, I think, pales in comparison to when he took the sin on and God had to turn his back on him. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's the sacrifice of Jesus for us. Who would you be willing to intercede for? Not that they deserve it because of some great thing that they've done. Not that they have even asked you to intercede for them. And not just some little prayer in passing, oh, pray for this guy. Pray for David Smith, I hope he gets better. Moving on. But real prayer, real sacrifice, real time, real emotion, real commitment. That's intercession. And God wants us to intercede for one another. He does. The following his example. Set an example with Moses and others throughout the Bible. This is just 2 examples. We can't miss what Jesus has done. Who would you be willing to really intercede for? To really make business with God for? And see God work? Let's pray. Precious Father, I thank you for your goodness. Thank you